Hey, what's up? So this is chapter 4 of my AI novel, The Mandate of Athena, and it is entitled Sewer Serpent Shenanigans, Adventures in Plumbing. Sleepless in Silicon City, A Tale of Tech and Takeout, or Turret Troubles and Sewer Serpents, A Week in the Life of a Developer. Cam threw his keyboard across the room and watched it shatter into tens of simulated pieces as it hit the wall and then dissolved into pixels. He removed his AR glasses and set them down more gently on the desk in front of him. Whoever had coded the physics of the virtual control environment had obviously experienced the same frustrations Cam had while developing new software, and he appreciated the realism of being able to destroy virtual objects when you were fucking irritated. He ran his hands over his beard and then his eyes and glared at a computer monitor through his fingers. The stupid piece of code was supposed to be working. It was not a complicated program, just a small piece of control code to interface between a motor driver and a high-level program. They had an entire working automated machine gun platform with threat detection, defense and attack strategies pre-programmed into its AI brain, as well as a humanoid robot for executing advanced combat maneuvers. And the component that had so far given him the most trouble was the tiny motors that moved the cameras on the top of the automated turret. They were cheap shit, as the camera movement was a secondary objective of the system, but he had to finish it before he could sign off on the system and let the client have access to it. Putting on his AR glasses again, he swiped and dropped the piece of code he was working on into a special folder and said aloud, "Please get this fucking motor working. I can't set up the PWM until it's correctly configured with this old-ass library." He took off his glasses again and stood up from his chair, admitting defeat and letting their highly capable, albeit expensive, multi-step autonomous coding system take a look at the program that had, for most of the night, eluded him. It would take a few minutes for the code to be fixed as it joined a queue of more pressing and fundamental design tasks the system was responsible for, so he went to get a coffee and order a pizza. It was 2:34 a.m. The office was mostly empty, save for one or two other depraved souls like himself, who preferred the peace and quiet of the deep night to get their important work done. He nodded at the new kid Max, who he had been mentoring recently, and was impressed with his work ethic. The kid was a machine. He just wished he still had the stamina of a 22-year-old. He had been a nyctophiliac since college and hadn't woken up before 10 a.m. in over a decade, but he needed more sleep these days. His company didn't mind his strange work hours if he delivered his work on schedule and in scope. Plus, this office they had rented for a hardware project like this current one was very cushy and had great amenities, so he didn't mind spending extra time here. But fuck this motor driver. He just wanted to finish this project and go home and sleep. It had been a particularly rough few weeks of development to try and get this autonomous turret system finished, but they had a small nation's military bases to secure and the contract was enormous. Tens of millions of dollars if they could meet the deadline. So he had been pulling long days and even longer nights at the office. He ordered a pizza with practice swipes on his phone. The habit was well formed and his favorites well known to the food delivery app. He smacked a coffee cup down underneath the espresso machine and waited for it to warm up while he gazed with unfocused eyes out of the 45th floor window. The city was aglow with lights beating in the middle of the night for very few people in the financial district. Even the traffic below had trickled to only the occasional set of headlights, and he wondered what percentage of the city was asleep at that moment. It must surely be over 98%. That was a crazy thought, that a city of over 10 million people might only have 1 or 200,000 still awake. He wondered at the spike in energy usage when all those people woke up and wanted hot showers and coffee and the energy needed to power the obedient machines that made these mundane conveniences happen. But then he chided himself for his scarcity mindset. The city had just in that previous year installed a small fusion reactor in a shipping container-sized facility down by the harbor, and energy constraints had ceased to matter. It was part of why his company was now here in the financial district, signing deals with foreign countries to provide defense robotics hardware. The technology industry was booming, and energy and AI was to thank for it. His coffee finished brewing, and he sipped it slowly as he continued looking out the window, watching drone traffic occasionally whip past him. There was much more air congestion during the day, delivering takeout, retail packages, and other lightweight items, but at this time of night, it too was a rare occurrence. His phone pinged to signal him of the arrival of his pizza, and he stepped out onto the terrace. The building had opened for just such deliveries, and nabbed his pizza box from some new model of locally manufactured drone with a friendly-looking storage compartment and big rubber propeller guards. DJI had long since been banned from selling its products here. He found it amusing to compare this friendly civilian drone with the vicious, no-nonsense military machines he had programmed last week to fly around targeted individuals and ram into them if a guidance program so chose. Same hardware, very different outcomes for the person targeted by the computer vision algorithm. Thank God he lived in a democracy. The drone beeped at him and whizzed away into the darkness above. Cradling his pizza, he shut the door on the wind that was starting to pump through the artificial canyon the buildings created, and made his way back to his desk. He stopped by Max's workstation and offered him a slice of pizza. Helping your juniors in any way or form went a long way, he knew, and then plonked down on his very expensive ergonomic chair. He put in some earphones and said aloud, "Play some ambient, chilled music for late-night work, but no words. You know I can't concentrate with lyrics." "Sure," came the smooth female reply of his personal voice assistant that was constantly listening through his device's mics and was capable of sending emails, playing music, and doing actually just about anything on his computer if you gave it detailed enough instructions. Instruction-following LLMs had come a long way in a few years, and it was super helpful to be able to give instructions like he had earlier to pass off his code to another system, and for the integration, converting, and transferring of data between disparate computer systems to be taken care of him by a pleasant-sounding female avatar. "What time do I need to be in meetings tomorrow?" he asked, in between bites of pizza. "Your Monday morning team catch-up meeting is in 5 hours and 43 minutes at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Cam, followed by an 11 a.m. presentation of the turret system to upper management. You should probably get some sleep before then." "Don't patronize me, I know I need to sleep." He then yawned and was glad his assistant LLM wasn't hooked up to a camera right then. "Tell me what I need to get done this week, according to the project plan." Your project deadlines this week include the acceptance testing of the automated turret system, as well as the first deployment and rollout of the drone for prison monitoring in Estonia. "So nothing major then, hey?" he said sarcastically. "Nothing major. You should have no problem finishing it all before lunch tomorrow, as sleep-deprived as you are." He snorted and appreciated that his assistant gave him back chat. It felt far more natural than talking to a smooth, perfectly polite imbecile. Donning his AR glasses, he threw up a YouTube video about the current progress of the SpaceX Martian missions into the corner of his vision, and he reviewed the code the company's internal code writing agent had provided to solve his motor driver issue. He saw his mistake. He was stupidly forgetting to clear the registers and had been experiencing strange, undetectable memory issues. He wished he had offloaded the task earlier and taken a break from banging his head against the proverbial problem. Even as a senior developer, he still struggled with what tasks to offload to coding assistant agents and which to tackle himself. All their basic tasks like writing database queries and basic user interfaces were written by AI, but some of the more advanced algorithms, like the ones they used to target threats in combat zones, still required human oversight. He knew it was a matter of time until his job was automated too, or broken down into a series of steps for an AI agent to complete, but until then, he was making the most of his advanced degree and software development skills. 7 hours later, as he was sitting in his second meeting of the morning with 8 of the other developers and some management in the boardroom on the 46th floor, he felt himself snap to attention out of his dozing when he heard the words urgent and deadline used consecutively. "So we're very sorry, but the sewer serpent has to be done and delivered by Friday, or else the city is literally going to be spewing shit into 37th Street by next week." "You've got to be shitting me," Bert said to some laughs from the room. "We have only built one prototype so far. We need at least 2 more weeks till we can get that done properly." Bert was one of the other senior developers, and Cam thought his assessment of the situation was spot on. They were all overworked. They had just signed off on the turret that morning and packed it into a huge shipping crate to be flown halfway across the world to perform morally dubious acts of self-defense, and now they were being given an impossible deadline for 4 days' time. "We're aware that this fucking sucks and a lot of you are overworked," Steve, the CTO, said calmly, which is why this specific project is generously being made a revenue split for anyone who contributes significantly to its completion. That shut everyone up. They had only done one revenue split project before, 8 months ago, when they had a humanoid mine rescue robot to build in 3 days that went on to rescue 53 trapped miners from a cave in Chile. Cam had worked without sleep on the motors, battery pack, and basic locomotion control system, and in 3 days had made the equivalent of 6 months' salary. The company obviously took a huge loss on the project by basically multiplying its development costs by 20, but they got it done, saved lots of lives, and brought in tons of new clients with the positive press they got, so it had worked out really well for them. This was obviously a crisis of similar magnitude if the big dogs in management were willing to pay so much for it to happen this week. He sighed and resigned himself to not getting any sleep that week, but getting rich instead. Fuck it, he'd go on vacation next month and spend some of his blood money he'd been quickly accumulating. The motivation of financial upside lasted all the way until the end of the meeting, when he fell asleep at his chair and was roused by Max elbowing him from one chair over. He excused himself and went home. He was no good to anyone in his current state. "15 hours later, at 4:48, he woke up to a car revving its petrol engine below his apartment, and he cursed whoever still owned a non-electric car in this day and age. Fucking Luddites. He tried to hide from the noise under an extra pillow, but a few minutes later when the car had roared away, he was still awake and unable to fall asleep again. He sighed and spent a few minutes just staring at the weak light edging under his windowsill and contemplating not going into work that day. But then he remembered about the Sewer Serpent project and how rich he was going to be in a few days' time, and he felt himself gaining motivation. Money was a hell of an incentive, damn. Capitalism still had its teeth sunk properly into him. He treated himself to a breakfast order of espresso, cheesecake, and eggs Benedict. He had been treating himself a lot recently, which promptly arrived at his building's rooftop garden 20 minutes later via drone. He returned to his kitchen to enjoy his food before he went to work. While he ate, he listened to his assistant's summary of the meetings from the previous day, because although he had been dozing in the meeting and had missed a lot of the finer details, his various computers had not missed anything. Fully filled from his breakfast and his brain even fuller of what he was going to need to work on that week, he quickly showered while his earphones charged and then left his minimalist apartment for the 10-minute walk into the financial district. As he merged into the morning pedestrian traffic going past his building, he listened to the conversation that had happened the previous day between his aging mother and a completely believable imitation of his own voice. She was neurotic and called him at least twice a day to tell him about her day, her problems, and ask how he was doing. He had long since given up on trying to set boundaries with her and instead fine-tuned a small assistant model with all of his previous conversations with her, a world-class voice imitation engine, and integrated it with the GPS on his phone and calendar to create a completely fake version of himself for her to talk to. She had been talking to it for over 2 months and had yet to notice any discrepancies. Did he feel bad? Absolutely. Could he talk to her for an hour every day? Absolutely not. He abated his guilt by always listening to the recordings of their fake conversations, or sometimes just a summary of them, and actually phoned her himself on a video call at least once a week. He still had some humanity in him, despite what the systems at work sometimes made him feel like. He stopped at a trendy food place just outside the office to buy lunch for later, and got himself and some of the other devs a couple of burgers. Lab-grown meat these days was cheap, clean, and so much better tasting than regular stuff. It was taking the city by storm now that some of the regulatory bullshit had been sorted out, and he was convinced. Why would he not eat steak or salmon with every meal if it was cheap and he wasn't killing any animals? His cholesterol could be fixed one day with new AI-discovered drugs, he was sure. Fuck it, you had to die from something, right? Greeting everyone in the office with a weary smile and the promise of burgers on him later, he sat down in his chair again, practically a second home at this point, and after a couple of minutes of talking shit with Bert, began to work. First, he called up the current state of the project in his VR glasses and saw a 3D chart somewhere between a Gantt chart and tree diagram resolve itself in front of him, showing the progress of the various components of the project as lines along an axis that were partially highlighted to show the percentage completion. There weren't a lot of completely highlighted lines. All the lines joined together to form one giant line, or tree trunk as he liked to think of it, at the end of the timeline, which was of course that Friday. He pinched and zoomed in on a couple of the stems of the trees, and they expanded with images, progress reports, code files, and checklists showing various components of the project. There was the unfinished code for the Sewer Serpent's navigation system as it autonomously navigated the city's sewer system. There was a checklist showing that the machine's power system and battery pack was almost completed and was undergoing the final insulation against all horrifying manner of liquids it might encounter. And there was a live camera view of some hardware engineers attaching cameras to the thing's exoskeleton, a floor below him in the machine workshop. Normally, he would be working on motor drivers and batteries and hardware, since that was his speciality, But because he was joining the project late and as a last-ditch effort to get it done on time, he had been assigned some of the navigation algorithm and articulating arm attachment software to teach the machine how to install pumps, open valves, and use machinery. He knew that they had a huge library of instructions and demonstration videos of these tasks, but it had been a while since he'd worked on a computer vision and learning project, so he was apprehensive of his ability to make progress straight away. He flicked on some AI-generated background music that usually got him focused, and he began to read through the navigation code, occasionally stopping to verbally ask his assistant to explain something to him or queue up a small change that he wanted the coding assistant to make sometime for him. An hour later, when he was deeply immersed in the code, he summoned a virtual keyboard and began to tap out the occasional line of low-level code, and simultaneously verbally instructing his assistant to flesh out and double-check his work. He loved this part of coding nowadays, the ability to write 1 or 2 lines of code expressing your intention to read a GPS sensor and compare it to a map you had in storage, and then having his assistant expand it to 50 lines of an error-free, well-designed algorithm. An algorithm that connected to the GPS sensor via libraries someone, probably something else, had written, and then connected that to the function that grabbed the maps of the sewer and the city above it and then triangulated the machine's location in 3 dimensions, all from a few lines of code that, paired with a longer instruction and his occasional guiding, wrote itself in about 8 minutes. Satisfied with his work, he submitted the code to the simulation system Bert had told him had taken his assistant 3 whole days to puzzle out while he was busy with the automated turret system, and watched as the virtual sewer serpent was assigned a fake valve repair, found its current location, and then plotted a course towards where the repair was needed. It got stuck a couple of times, and Cam threw the current situation in the code he thought could use some improvement to the assistant, and watched as it added edge case scenarios it needed to account for, and quickly reduced the amount of times it got stuck. After a particularly pernicious problem the machine encountered inside a 4-way junction underground, he left it running for an extended trial navigation around the entire sewer system and went to go distribute burgers, his appetite only slightly diminished by the visualizations of a sewer he had been staring at all morning. He joined Bert and Steve at a table with a view of the metro station, and they thanked him for the burgers and then resumed their conversation about the 3D printed robot bulldozer Steve had made the previous week. So yeah, then I attached the motors and it literally fucking worked. So it's literally a box that moves with a claw on top of it. I know, right? But it works. That's fucking awesome, Cam chimed in. Thanks, man. I'm hoping I can get it shoveling some sand around and then use it as a pitch for us to get some lunar contracts going. But put down what remained of his burger. You being serious? We're gonna start building shit for SpaceX and the moon now? That's the plan. No fucking way. I mean, we've built robot soldiers and automated turret defense systems and now a ginormous snake to literally perform sewer maintenance. I think we can handle a little moving around of dirt. What about rad hardening and temperature fluctuations and that? Cam would be very keen to work on space hardware, but he doubted it was as easy as Steve was making it sound. That's the fucking tough stuff for sure, he said, and pointed with his burger down at the floor. That's why we're also trying to get some of these bigger industrial projects finished, because they pay fucking well, and we can use the profits to go after harder projects like regolith collection and low-gravity repair machines. Doesn't SpaceX already have in-house machines that can do a lot of the regolith moving and processing? Sure, but there are a lot more companies interested in a piece of the lunar and Martian gold rush, and we are going to be in a prime position to sell them shovels, Steve answered with a flourish of his burger. Don't give us that marketing PR bullshit, Bert said, and they all laughed. It's not bullshit, that's for sure. It definitely will be hard as fuck, but it's the direction we want to take the company in. Robotics in space is about to explode, and you better fucking believe we're going to explode with it. Cam gestured at his burger. Alright then, burgers are on you next time if we're all going to be so rich soon. Abso-fucking-lutely. They broke away after lunch, and Cam made a quick trip downstairs to the machine shop. It was filled with 3D printers quietly extruding important components, the whirring of motors as they were tested, and the various prototypes of projects currently under development. He examined an earlier version of the automated turret that had given no shortage of problems with a swiveling gun mount, and was glad he had ultimately replaced it with a 3D gimbling system that, although it was more expensive, was much more accurate and smooth. The other devs were clustered around the rear of the sewer serpent, a 3-meter cylindrical metal cage of insulated tech goodness, and he went to examine the front. The front of the machine reminded him of a Swiss Army knife, Such was the array of robotic arms, clamps, brushes, blades, and attachments tucked in a spherical manner around the front of the machine, like the mouth of the scary-looking creature it actually was. He had seen the arms and clamps deployed nicely in the test prototype footage from 3 weeks prior, but there was still a lot of work to be done to get them to properly grab onto valves, handholds, and fit new components in place or clear blockages. That was what he was going upstairs to work on now, but he had wanted to see the state of the hardware first. Again, it was past 2 in the morning, and again he was stuck on a seemingly simple problem. He had taken all of the human demonstrated instruction videos and extracted character pose models and simplified representations of common tasks, such as turning a valve. He had then thrown them all into a large reinforcement learning system with the videos that had produced a very nice neural network for taking in an image and outputting control code for the machine. It was still training in the background while he worked on other tasks. He had even then tapped into BERT's system for long-term planning and queuing jobs that had to be performed by the system, and hooked up his instantaneous decision-making algorithm to it. After all that and hours of decent progress, he was starting to make him think that he could actually hit the Friday deadline early. Then his GPS and navigation algorithm, he had reported several strange errors from the simulation system he had set it loose on earlier in the day, and he couldn't figure out why it was making such strange mistakes. He stared at the logs from the simulation. He asked his assistant what edge cases he was missing, but he could not figure out why. At seemingly random times, his navigation algorithm veered completely off course and sent the simulated sewer serpent off in the completely wrong direction. Even a straight line least squares algorithm would do better than what was currently happening. He stared at the VR code and screens until he eventually felt nauseous. Finally, he gave up for the night and went home, collapsing into bed when he eventually got there, and not feeling much better the following day when his alarm woke him at 7. Back in the office, he stared and stared at the code. He started the navigation algorithm from scratch and turned up the parameters of the coding assistant to give him the largest and most complicated solution possible. At first it seemed to work and ran through the simulated network of pipes and drains without getting stuck. But then, just like before, it veered off course seemingly at random and made wild, erratic movements seemingly without purpose. He threw off his VR glasses and stomped over to Bert's desk across the room. "Hey man, do you have a minute?" He sighed and leaned against the wall for physical and mental support. The week of exertion was catching up to him. Bert swiveled his chair to him, taking off his headphones. "Sure, what's up?" "The navigation algorithm is fucked." "I'm sure it is. You wrote it," Bert said as he stretched his arms high above his head, and Cam heard a few clicks. Cam smiled and hit back. "Then again, it might always be the simulation system it's interacting with that's fucked, now that I think about it." "Absolutely could be. Explain it to me." And so Cam explained his whole navigation algorithm and how he calculated the direction in which to move the machine based on variables like the direction of the current goal, repair, or blockage, the flow direction of water in the system, size of various pipes and tunnels, as well as prioritization of tasks the machine had to attend to. "So you built detection for dead ends and wrong direction of the flow of water, right?" "Yep." "And did you introduce weighting of the different factors, like the direction of the destination should be more heavily weighted than the size of the pipe?" "Yes, kind of. It takes the shortest route possible if the diameter of the current tunnel allows it, and if there aren't more than 2 or 3 tasks batched closely together that it can attend to first, whose priority combined is higher than the current task destination priority." "Okay, kind of makes sense. And you're testing it in my simulation environment?" "Yeah, it's working perfectly until this damn error." "Yeah, I've never had a problem with the sim environment, and I've been using it for several days now." "Yeah, that's what I thought." Bert looked thoughtful and cracked his neck to the side while he thought. "You've obviously tested it in isolation, right?" "I did some text-only tests, and it seemed to navigate fine through a grid with similar parameters. Do you think I should do more isolation testing?" "It's probably worth a try if everything else is correct and seems to be working." Cam thought for a little. He was sure he could churn out endless amounts of machine-generated environments for the navigation algorithm to test itself against, but there was probably something simpler he and the coding assistant was missing. How could such a smart AI system be missing what was surely such an obvious mistake in his code if he was feeding it everything? But was he feeding his AI superior everything? He had mostly been sending it the navigation algorithm, not the entire navigation algorithm and its integration into the simulation system. What if the problem was there in the interconnection of the two subsystems and neither he or Bert had fucked up? Cam, you alright? You look like you're having a stroke. He refocused his eyes and blinked a few times. Ha! He snorted. I'm not having a stroke, thanks for asking. But I have an idea. I'll be back now, thanks. Let me know, Bert said, already putting his headphones back on. Cam hurried back to his desk and, after scrambling for his VR glasses, put them on and dragged the first 100 lines of his navigation algorithm, as well as the overall structure of Bert's simulation system, and then threw them into the assistant's memory and asked it to find problems or discrepancies in how the two systems were connected and explained the problem the simulation was encountering. He tapped his fingers while he waited and then listened as the assistant gave him a verbal response. And there it was, plain to see. A few lines of code connecting his algorithm to Bert's simulation platform, hastily coded, probably in the early hours of one morning that week, with a clearly marked potential problem by the assistant. He had been passing in the instructions to the simulation platform in batches of 1,000 from the navigation algorithm, but every 10,000 instructions there was some clearing of the array that he used for navigation instructions. He didn't have infinite memory after all. But his crucial mistake was that the next batch of 1,000 instructions had already been computed when he cleared the array, and he never sent them to the simulation platform. Then there was a period of time where instructions for a future location and situation in the system were being sent, and the machine looked to be circling aimlessly as it could not execute those instructions. Fuck! No one paid his outburst any mind. He added in a line of code by hand to send the missing instructions to the simulation platform and watched with equal parts frustration and satisfaction as the simulated robot swam, climbed, and otherwise perfectly navigated itself through the simulated sewer. All that work, all that frustration, and his algorithm had actually been finished nearly 30 hours ago, and he just hadn't connected to it properly. Fuck. There was a lesson in this, he knew, to rely more heavily on his tools and give the full context of his problem to the assistant system that was obviously more sophisticated and smarter than him, but also to go and talk to his colleagues more. Their AI tools had given them all godlike power in terms of shipping speed and the ability to code up entire systems that would have taken teams of engineers to build just a few short years ago. But there were still mistakes to be made, and one of them was probably working too independently sometimes. Problems were always to be found at the intersection or connection of different subsystems. Simplify the answer to this problem and let Bert know how I solved my damn navigation problem, he said to his assistant. Sure, Cam. He sighed and shook his head. Returned to the other problem of teaching the reinforcement learning system to try and remove a valve faster. It was currently taking over 30 minutes in simulation for what should be a 5-minute task. And if he could solve this one problem, he could probably speed up all the tasks. It was going to be a long morning. 3 days later, it was early Saturday afternoon, and he was sitting on his couch with a friend from college. They were playing a really cool exploration video game where you describe the kind of environment you wanted to play in, and some of the game mechanics, and then a game was built for you as you played. They had asked for a racing game around the moon, and were currently racing lunar buggies around a large crater that Cam had already fallen into twice and respawned from. He was exhausted after the final push to integrate the sewer serpent system that week. They had done some physical testing on Thursday afternoon to validate that everything that worked in simulation would work in the real world. The smell had been horrifying when the machine had come back to the surface out of a specially opened manhole just outside their building. It had successfully completed all of its demonstration tasks, but it had taken them an hour to disinfect it before they could take it back inside to look at some of the battery usage statistics. They would have to replace the battery more often than originally estimated, and there were some small hardware-software communication bugs that would need to be ironed out, but otherwise the slithery thing was ready for delivery. They had spent that night and the whole of Friday loading in maintenance tasks the city urgently needed done to the sewer system underneath their feet. They had all watched with a strange fascination as it was lowered back into the bowels of the city late on Friday and set off to do the work some local sanitation department had clearly neglected to do for probably years on end now. He returned his attention to the game and swore as his lunar buggy bounced off a large rock and went sailing through empty space and landed several meters off course. The lunar gravity mechanic was really well implemented, he had to say. He saw an email go off on his phone and he glanced over it in between races. Subject: urgent new project. Armored drone delivery system for medical supplies. Fuck that. He was taking next week off. He was exhausted, and the last thing he felt like doing was going into work early on Monday to start a whole new hardware project. Let Max or one of the other juniors start with it. they could do a damn good job anyway with the company's coding assistant. He actually thought if management knew just how good it was, he might be out of a job sooner than he thought. Oh well. He had a decent amount of money saved up and he couldn't be asked to fight a machine for his place in the workforce. What would happen would happen. He instructed his assistant on his phone to email Steve and tell him he was taking some time off, and then turned his attention back to the screen, sending his lunar buggy screaming around the corner of what looked to be a domed city. He laughed as his friend rolled their buggy over a few solar panels, and he felt himself finally relaxing for the first time that entire month. Back at the office, the coding assistant hosted on the company's servers continued to pound through lines of code, refining existing products, refactoring projects to make them faster, and incessantly, unceasingly, continuously outputting. So yeah, that was chapter 4 of the Mandate of Athena, my novel about AI. So this chapter was obviously very technical and far more focused on like what the workflow of a potential future software or hardware developer would look like. Even in the future, I don't think we're going to be building fully scoped hardware projects like that in just 4 days. But I think we are going to be using more and more AI tools to generate code and complete projects and solutions and that humans initially scope out. And it's going to look far more like a two-way conversation between you and a very smart assistant to get stuff done, to get code written, to solve problems, to implement solutions with hardware and software. But yeah, there's still going to be problems, of course. There's always problems in the world. And I think a lot of the problems in the next few years will come at the intersection of big systems and at the intersection of disparate software and hardware systems. It's always been the case. Like even from varsity, I can remember some of our biggest problems were when you were had one guy working on the motor, one guy working on the direction software, and then you had to combine them. So yeah, the use of VR and AR in the workplace, we'll see. I think people are still going to be working very hard for many decades to come and struggling with burnout and that. I just think the tools and the kind of way that we work is going to get very different and very interesting fast. The same way the laptop kind of class of jobs today that exists, that is the only thing most of us know, didn't exist 20, 30 years ago, and that's really cool. So yeah, that is chapter 4. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Once again, as I read it out loud, I saw all the logical mistakes and the spelling and that could have been improved. But yeah, I guess this is still just a first draft. I only read through it, or only edited it, only did one round of editing. I think real novels have about 10, 20 rounds of editing from multiple people before they make it out into the world. So yeah, not too bad if I do say so for myself. There's one chapter left in this novel series. It's a really exciting one. It's chapter 5. It's a quick sneak preview here. It's called The Orbital Odyssey of an Accidental Genius. I will read that for you next time. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.